Welcome, Astrophiles. This is Pat Cosgrove for Cosgrove's Cosmos. Today we have a short update on my observatory project, probably the last one we're going to have before I actually break ground. So, let's get started. The last few weeks we've had a lot of things going on, and things are starting to come together for the observatory project. And I thought what I'd do is just take a few moments to review them quickly, just give you an idea where things are and what's coming up next. I'm going to try to do this update a little bit differently than I normally do. I'm going to go back to the actual post on my webpage, which summarizes the status, and I'm going to speak to that. This is kind of an experiment. We'll see how it works out. First thing I want to talk about is the tree work that we recently had done. Now, the new property is vastly superior to my old property in terms of access to the sky, but even when I first saw it, I saw there are a few trees that could be bobbed or removed that would vastly improve the skyline even further. This is looking north, and we have some trees up in here which will reach up a little bit. Those trees there I can remove, as well as that one, which will open things up. Some of the trees over here I can remove, which will open up that part of the sky a little bit. But as I look south, I really have a pretty good open chunk of sky there. So I decided before we broke ground, that's some work that I wanted to have done. I had several goals for this work. My first goal was to remove some trees on the northwest and west sides of my property that were blocking the view. Then I wanted to bob some trees as we moved towards the south, so I had a little bit cleaner horizon when you looked in that particular direction. The other thing I wanted to do was remove some trees on the east. Now, I didn't think this was going to open my sky up too much because I knew there was another line of trees right behind it, but some of these were very tall trees with split trunks towards the base. And I always had this horrible notion that at some point we could have windstorm, one of those would come down and end up doing something like this, falling on and crushing my brand new observatory. So I wanted to take those out in order to protect the observatory. Let me zip past through this, and I think this is a really good image to talk about what my goals were here. Now this is a panoramic image that I shot. This is looking towards the south. This is looking towards the west, and here is the northwest, and this wraps around up in here into the north. And you can see what I saw. I had some tall trees in here that were cutting off my view, and I thought if we could take some of these trees out here, this would open up the skyline right there. I thought taking this tree down here would open this up dramatically. There's another tree here I wanted to take down, and if I took those down, I could really drop my horizon right down to here. Then as we came to the south, some of these trees just had some pieces that were sticking up. So I thought, well, why not get someone up there just to bob the trees and clean them up a little. And that's what we ended up doing. The guys came in and did the tree work. They did an amazing job. And this is my after picture. And as you can see, as we removed this tree, that really opened up this portion of the sky here. And we can see taking this tree down in here really opened this up quite a bit. And that was a big enhancement. On the other hand, I had a bit of a surprise. When I took this tree down, I discovered there was another tree right behind it. Well, I figured I'll just take that tree down as well. Well, it turns out that behind that was yet another tree. So for now, I've left it. I have the option of taking this out in the future, but I'm holding steady for right now. And right in here, we can see where we cleaned it up. We bobbed things down, and we have a little bit flatter, cleaner lines when you get to the horizon. Here's that tree I was talking about that cut down a tree was right in here. And it left this one exposed, and it still blocks my sky here. But if I cut down a whole row of trees here, it also reduces some of the buffer with the property that's over in this direction. So I was hesitant to do that. So perhaps in the future, if this turns out to be an irritant, I'll end up taking this out, or maybe I'll end up bobbing it in here. So that work was all done, and things are ready to go. Some of the land up in here was damaged. You notice this is nice green ground here, and this is kind of chopped up. I told them since we're about to bulldoze this to get ready for the foundations for the observatory, they didn't have to worry about protecting the lawn. That reduced my costs a little bit and made it a little bit easier for them to do the work, but it did end up damaging the lawn, which I'm just putting up with right now until we break ground for the observatory. The other thing that we had is we finally got the stamped blueprints for our plan. Now, I've been working with the builder to come up with the final plan that I was going to work with. My original plans, which I had shared in the past, used a poured concrete foundation on all sides, and that used a lot of concrete and was very expensive and drove prices up well beyond what I wanted to spend. The contractor I'm working with suggested we go to a pole barn method using the permacolumn system of creating the structure. This creates a pretty strong structure, but doesn't rely on such an expensive amount of concrete in order to do that. So I decided to go in this direction, but I thought it would be good if we were going to change the basic design to make sure we had the engineering right. So we were working with a professional engineer to create a stamp set of new diagrams that I could use not only for building the structure and being sure that it was going to be solid and do what I wanted it to do, but also so when I went to the building inspector and wanted to get a building permit, I really had an engineered plan that he was looking at. I figured I'm building something that's already something he's probably not used to looking at. I wanted to make sure that he was comfortable that engineering had gone into this particular project. So we started to do that. And one of the things we were talking about as we made the change, since we're going to make another set of blueprints, what other things do we want to change while we're doing that? Well, one is going to the permacolumn construction, which I already talked about. The other thing I wanted to do is increase the wall height from 6.5 to 7 foot. The goal here was so that I could open the roof and clear all the telescopes, regardless of what position they're in, to simplify the logistics of an emergency closing of the roof. So we wanted to get that in there. We were adding some decorative windows on the south elevation so that when you saw the observatory from the house, it would look kind of like a little cottage or something. So that's purely for aesthetics and has no functionality whatsoever. I wanted to increase the height of the door to as tall as I could get. So I'm 6'6", so I want to protect my head every time I go into the observatory. So getting the biggest door I can get in there would be really handy to have. And then finally, we had some discussion about changing the outrigger framework, which would hold the roof when the roof rolls off. And the idea here is if we did this in wood over time is going to warp, it's going to settle. It could cause the tracks to become non-parallel, non-level, and I could have problems with the roof. So we were talking about maybe what we could do is create a steel framework. And with a steel framework, it would have greater dimensional stability and wouldn't have that problem. So the first preliminary plans came back, and they were very good, but they used an I-beam for the supports under the roof when it rolls off. And I was a little concerned about that because I know I-beams are very strong when you have vertical loads coming down, but they're not so strong when you have side loads coming at it. And we do get winds coming up in there, and I wanted to make sure the structure was solid to that. So we shifted from an I-beam to using 4x4 box channel steel tube. And the new plan came back with that in there, and I really liked it. It's a really strong framework. The steel will be brought on site, cut to size and welded on site. And then what we did is not only is the top beam now going to be this 4x4 metal, but that's going to run all the way through into the building, and that'll be the top plate of the walls as well. So we should have something that's much firmer in terms of anchoring tracks and something that won't change over time. So that was very good. But we ended up with finally having a new stamp set of plans. And in here you can see this is the foundation plan, and here are the 24-inch holes that we'll be drilling to get the posts in for the pole barn construction. And then it's going to look very similar to what I had before. It's just that it's going to be built in a slightly different fashion. It'll have metal framework out in here. And as we look at the building here, you can see that this metal framework is actually going to continue all the way into the building here. You can see the cross section here. Here are the 2x6 posts from the pole barn construction. And then right here, you can see this is the 4x4 beam that'll be the top plate. On top of that is a track. The wheels will be here. And then we have the roof structure. And this particular part of the roof structure is going to be 3 2x6s with a 1/2-inch plywood separator with a plate underneath it. So we'll be using this wood to bolt the wheels into it. But here, the track itself is going to have this metal framework. And I was much happier with that design. And then the cross beams in here are, again, the same kind of metal. They're going to be cut inside and welded. And this should be very strong. I don't expect much settlage, but we have some adjusters jacks in here, and it should be more dimensionally stable than what we had in the past. Now that I had the plan in hand, I wanted to be ready to go for the building permit. One of the things I knew I needed for the building permit is a site plan. And I was very fortunate that when we were looking for land, we talked to the building departments of each of the towns that we were considering looking for property in. And our current town's building office was great to work with, very friendly, very inviting. The building inspector himself was very reasonable, spent a lot of time with us, answered our questions, really great to work with, and actually seemed very interested and excited in the project. Some of the other towns we talked to were much more bureaucratic, much less helpful, very polite, but not very helpful. It's like they didn't really want to answer questions for fear of being held to those answers. So they sort of talked around things, and it was kind of frustrating. But fortunately, we ended up buying property only 3 miles from where our old house was. So we're still in the same town, and we had really reasonable people to deal with. And through my interactions with that office, I knew that one of the things they would accept for a site map is a stake map or survey map that you get when you close your house, where I would draw in to scale the building and then locate where that building was relative to existing features on the property, and making sure that that location was handling all the offsets and whatnot. So this is a portion of that particular map. Here is the Observatory, 16 by 20. Here's the outrigger region. This is the property line. 20 foot in is about here. That's the offset we have to worry about, so we've got plenty of room for that. And then in order to really secure this, I took one corner of the house and one corner of a shed that we have, and I just measured the front corners of the buildings and gave those distances. And this was sufficient for the needs to do the building permit. And so this is what I prepared. This seemed to meet their approval. So I went in and I talked to the building office, and they said that, well, this is a very busy part of the season. This is the build season. Building inspector is very, very busy. This is going to take 7 to 10 days to turn around. And I was a little concerned about that, but they have to do what they have to do. So I submitted my application with all the paper maps, but they also wanted a PDF version of the map as well. So they asked me to email that directly to the building inspector. So I did that, and I reminded him that I had talked to him before, that I was changing the design over to a pole barn kind of construction. And using his advice, I had gone to a professional engineer and had a new set of plans. And this was all part of the application process. And I know he was busy, but if there's anything to do to speed that up, I would personally really appreciate it. I quickly got an email back saying that he would look at that afternoon. And later that afternoon, I got an email saying that it was approved. I could come down the next morning, pick up my permit, pay the $50 fee, and I was ready to go. So really appreciated how practical and helpful and how they were able to expedite that. So I ended up getting my building permit, which is a key enabler to get things going. So that was a very simple process for us. So that worked out great. The next step, of course, is I want to schedule the build. The engineering's done. We have the building permit. When can I get the crews in to actually do the work? And one of the problems with that is we've had a very, very poor summer, lots of rain, and outdoor work has been delayed. And a lot of schedules are sliding, and that's no different from the builder I'm going with. He's had his projects delayed, so my start is going to delay. I was originally going to be starting in the middle of this month, almost now. We're probably pushed off about 4 weeks. While I am disappointed about that, I'm not completely surprised, and I guess that gives me more time to make sure all my plans are in place. Next topic I wanted to just talk about briefly is an update on my custom piers. The last time we talked about it, I had cut all the steel parts and we were submitting them to the welder for welding. So the parts were sent off to the welder and we just picked them up. And here are the 4 piers, and here's their final form. And these are coming out just the way I hoped. They look great. The welder took a few pictures of his operation, and I wanted to share that with you here. You can see that what he has here is something that looks like a lathe, where he can put the main pipe. He's got it on rollers on both sides and it's level. Now he can put pieces on and rotate and weld those right in place. Here you can see one of the piers where it's already been welded. And here's a close-up where he's actually bolted the main plate right into this turntable. And you can see all the fine welding of the bottom plate to the pipe and the support fins. If you look in here, you can see the real detail of the careful welding that was done. I'm really impressed with the quality of the work they did. Here's a couple more images. So my piers are coming together. I'm really excited about that. These were put into Gary Villa's truck, and we took it to the next station here, which is the painters. Right now they have the piers. They're going to be sandblasting the piers and then painting them. I picked out a nice bright blue color that I thought would look great on these. And so about another week, I'll be picking these up and the pier project should be done and ready for installation. Another update is we've gotten some more hardware. One of the things I've talked about in previous videos is the flat track. And here is a picture of the flat track that I had made. Gary Villa bought the material, which is 3/8 inch stainless steel. He had it cut with his laser processes, and then we had a little bit of machining in there. You can see that these are long pieces, but not too long to handle. We have some with angled ends and some flat ends. And the idea here is this is going to be one end of the track. It's etched so we know which end is up. We have some countersunk holes so that we can really screw this down and the screw heads won't be sticking up onto the track surface itself. And in this picture, you can see the idea that when the two pieces of track are put together, we have a 45-degree angle. These will be butted up against one another. And so when the wheel is going across this transition, it has a gradual change rather than an abrupt step. This should keep the rolling fairly smooth. Excited to have that piece, and that's the last piece of track that I needed to have in here. The other thing we wanted to do is I bought these V-groove wheels. They were very good price, closed bearings, and they could handle 2,300 pounds each. So these are pretty strong, but they were narrow, and I was a little concerned about how narrow they were. And Rick Albrecht suggested one way to distribute the lateral loads and reinforce it is to create a series of 3x5 plates that have the same hole pattern. And the idea is you put the wheel right on this and then bolt this right into the top plate of the roof. Now, when there's any lateral loads, this helps distribute it side to side and should reinforce everything there. So Gary Villa, again, kindly took the metal, had these cut to shape, had them drilled out, and these are ready to go. And I was real happy how this turned out. Another thing I had to do is I had to secure the L-bolts. So I have a round, 12-inch round foundation plate for each of the piers. And these bolts will bolt it into it 6 per plate. And they'll be sunk right into the wet concrete, and that'll create the basic foundation for the piers. The piers will pop down over these bolts. Then some custom washers will go on top of that, and then they'll be bolted down. But I had to supply the hardware for that. So what I ended up going with is we had already determined we were going to work with a 1/2-inch bolt thread. So I got 1/2-inch diameter threaded rod, L rod, and this is 12 inches long, which is about the longest I could find. And these will then be bolted into the foundation plates, 6 per, and those will be ready to be sunk into the actual foundations for each of the piers when we're ready to do that. I also ended up getting these are all hot dip galvanized, I should mention, and I ended up getting galvanized washers and bolts that would serve for when we're ready to do this part. The final thing that I was asked to do is to finish the site preparation. Now, I say the final thing because I've already staked out the location of the building, aligned it north-south, all of that. But in talking with the builder I'm working with, he was mentioning that when they do preparation, they not only prepare just for the outline of the building, but they do a pad that's 3 foot bigger than the building in all dimensions. And he wanted me to lay out what that pad would look like. And I did that, and it turned out the day after I did that, I had a visit from the builder and the excavator who looked at the site, looked at the plan, and talked about how they're going to handle that. So it was good that I had that done in time. I did have some trouble laying it out originally. I laid things out, and I used a laser at night and a compass app on my phone to make sure I had a really good north-south alignment, and then I measured off the 16 by 20 footprint for the building and the outriggers. But before I did the outside 3-foot pad, I decided to make sure that this was square. Of course, I measured the diagonals of the building itself, and they should have the same length. And unfortunately, they did. They're off by a couple of feet. So it turns out I had not laid out a nice rectangle. I had laid out a nice parallelogram. So I ended up researching a method to make sure my corners were 90 degrees. I used a 3-4-5 method. And if you're wondering what that is, do a Google search. There are a lot of videos for it. It's a pretty common technique, one I was not familiar with. And that lets you make sure that every 90-degree angle is in fact 90 degrees. So I redid that, laid it out. Then I measured out and got the 3-foot perimeter for that. And then I staked that out. And you can see an image of the top of the hill where I have that staked out. Now these stakes are pretty small, and in this image you couldn't see it. So I somewhat crudely drew in some lines here. So the red lines here, this is the main building itself. And the 4 piers will be sort of 2 in here and then 2 in here towards the front. Then this back portion is the outrigger. This doesn't look square because I didn't draw this very carefully, unfortunately, but it gives you an idea. Then the yellow line is the 3-foot pad around it. An excavator is going to come in and he's going to end up pulling all of the topsoil off of the area in here. Then they'll level it out, and then they'll put in a foundation of packed stone and roll that flat. That will be the basic foundation area that we're going to be building everything from. The topsoil is going to be stockpiled to the side and brought back later to, get the landscaping worked out again. The other thing that they'll be doing is they'll be cutting a trench from this building all the way to the house, about 160 some odd feet, so we can run power and Ethernet underground. I also have a shed on the property that they'll be digging a trench to. I'm going to run power to that at the same time. Looks like the excavation, the first breaking of ground, if you will, is likely to take place within the next 2 weeks. They're going to be sending someone out to check for underground, power lines and gas lines and things like that, stake that out, and then by the end of the month, we expect to have the excavation work done. And then hopefully a couple of weeks after that, we'll have the crews descend and we'll really start building. So it looks like we could be breaking ground within like the next couple of weeks. And then we'll sit there for a couple of weeks. All the materials will be delivered, and then we'll have a flurry of activity in September trying to get this built. So that's where we stand today. Like I said, I don't think I'm going to have a major update until we actually break ground, and then I'll share the progress then. The one thing I may do is when I get the piers back, they're all painted, I may do a very short segment to show how they turned out. But as for right now, I'm kind of in a holding pattern. I have all my hardware in hand and in place, and now it's just waiting for the excavator and the start of work. So again, thanks for spending some time with me today. If you find this kind of content useful or helpful, please like and subscribe. And again, I'm always interested in your comments and questions, both here on this YouTube channel and on my website. So this is Pat Cosgrove for Cosgrove's Cosmos, signing off and wishing you clear skies and excellent seeing.